I want to do a follow-up on the situation in Sri Lanka. It's not to say that people don't have a legitimate grievance against the outgoing government. It's just that the US has clearly invested in overthrowing this government. A US-backed opposition taking power is not going to improve things. People always say, well, it can't get worse than this. It absolutely can. If you get an obedient US client regime in power, I guarantee you it will get worse. I have many people sending me information since I did my last video. It's a very long and extensive video. I asked people that if they had any additional information to please send it, and one of my supporters sent me a Reuters article, this one right here, how a band of activists helped bring down Sri Lanka's government. And whenever you see the Western media publishing an article like this, you could almost guarantee that whoever they're about to talk about is funded by the US government. And this article is no exception, and I'm going to walk you through it. So the article says, in June, a few dozen activists started meeting regularly at a seaside tented camp in Colombo for hours-long sessions to think up ways to revive Sri Lanka's flagging protest movement. The group, which included a Catholic priest, a digital strategist, and a popular playwright, succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. Within weeks, hundreds of thousands of people descended on Colombo after initially clashing with police protesters occupied key government buildings and residences, forcing President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his prime minister to promise to step down. I'm still trying to process it, said Chamira Deraduwagi, a digital strategist at a major advertising firm who became part of the team that helped organize the uprising. The article also says, in interviews, veterans of the small meeting described how they agreed on a multi-pronged campaign to inject new life into the movement widely known as Aragalya, or struggle, in Sinhala. The movement had begun in March when thousands took to the streets to vent their anger at lengthy power cuts and spiraling prices, and to call for the Rajapaksa family that had dominated the country's politics for much of the last 20 years to leave power. And of course, as I have explained, these spiraling prices are directly linked to the US government, their sanctions on Russia, driving up fuel and food prices around the globe, and also the fact that Sri Lanka owes the vast majority of its debt to Western financial institutions, not to China. China only makes up 10% of Sri Lanka's total debt. So when you hear that, a warning bell should go off. Now, the Reuters article continues. Here's another very suspicious thing that should stand out. The role of US-based social media companies in all of this. Sri Lanka has around 5 million households and 8 million active Facebook accounts, making online outreach an extremely effective way to reach demonstrators, said Dedawagi, that digital strategist. And we're gonna go look into his background here in just a moment. Which means basically through Facebook, we can practically reach every corner of the country at no cost. Dudawagi told Reuters, sitting at a tent in the Gotta Go village, the main Colombo protest site that mockingly refers to the president. Now, we know for a fact that US-based social media companies work directly with the US State Department to help promote US-backed regime change everywhere, all over the world. As a matter of fact, check out this 2011 New York Times article. US groups helped nurture Arab uprising, and while the Western media portrayed the Arab Spring as some kind of spontaneous uprising, the fact is the US spent years engineering it ahead of time, and this New York Times article admits it. So it says, some Egyptian youth leaders attended a 2008 technology meeting in New York where they were taught to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy. Among those sponsoring the meeting were Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia Law School, and the US State Department. And just remember, if there is a political movement taking place that the US disagrees with, Facebook will shut it down. They will ban their accounts, they will be booted off of Facebook, their reach will be buried by Facebook's algorithm. So if there's a movement that's actually being helped along by Facebook, you know that it somehow is congruent with US foreign policy objectives, as is the protest in Sri Lanka. And that's not to say that there isn't some legitimate grievance that people in Sri Lanka have. Obviously, the country has major problems, and this current government wasn't able to resolve them, but you need to be careful that you don't end up with someone who's actually even worse, if you could even imagine that. The New York Times article admitted Facebook's role alongside the US State Department in preparing years ahead of time for the Arab Spring. It also says a number of the groups and individuals directly involved in the revolts and reforms sweeping the region, this was during the Arab Spring, 2011 Arab Spring, received training and financing from groups like the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and Freedom House, a nonprofit human rights organization based in Washington, according to interviews in recent weeks and American diplomatic cables obtained by WikiLeaks. And the New York Times also explains how all of these organizations fall under the United States National Endowment for Democracy, NED. All of these are subsidiaries of the NED, and that was created by the US government, it's overseen by the US government, and every single year it is funded by the US government. It is America's regime change organization. It funds and supports regime change all around the world under the smokescreen of promoting democracy. Now, I told you I was going to get back to Chamira Daduwagi. I'm going to explain to you what I found. So I saw this name. He's a digital strategist, and he's leading this movement that the Western media is keen to promote. So I looked his name up, and I got this LinkedIn profile right here. And if you scroll down, volunteer experience. So he's a campaign volunteer for this organization called PAFFREL, or People's Action for Free and Fair Elections. And their website looks like this. And even before I clicked on the partners and affiliation tab on their website, I knew that it was a US government-funded organization because its name is almost identical to the ANFREL, Asian Network for Free Elections. That is an organization that meddles heavily here in Thailand in the elections and all across Southeast Asia. And because Asia is its region of its area of responsibility, of course, it is going to be involved in meddling in Sri Lanka. So this ANFREL, this is funded by the US government. We know that because we could just go to the National Endowment for Democracy's official website. You go on to Regions, Asia Regional 2021, and you scroll down, and it's right here. It's this one right here. Now, the National Endowment for Democracy, just in case you somehow still believe that it's actually promoting democracy, and there's nothing wrong with taking NED money, and so these protests in Sri Lanka being backed by the NED, that's not some sort of problem. Just look at the board of directors. Again, this is the NED's official website, and when you scroll down, you're going to see people like Elliot Abrams, people like Scott Carpenter, and also Victoria Nuland. Now, Elliot Abrams was involved in covering up death squads in Latin America while in the US State Department. They were killing thousands of men, women, and children. He helped cover it up. Scott Carpenter was directly involved in the invasion of Iraq. He was part of the provisional government that took power after the US murdered, arrested, or drove out the actual Iraqi government. He's this white guy walking around Iraq running the country until they could handpick the client regime to take its place. And then Victoria Nuland, of course, she's infamous for her involvement in US-sponsored regime change in Ukraine in 2014, leading to the war that we see now unfolding in Ukraine, transforming it into a belligerent proxy of US interests in Eastern Europe and pitting it in a proxy war against Russia. This is what the NED actually does. So the NED's involvement in Sri Lanka, its support for these protests, should alarm absolutely everyone in Sri Lanka. Even if you're totally against the current government, you need to be aware of the NED's involvement in the protests and the prospects of your dissatisfaction with the government being hijacked and used to create a situation that is even worse for Sri Lanka. So I just thought I would point that out. I'm going to continue researching this. I greatly appreciate everyone who is sending information in to me. So we'll keep an eye on this.